Hello and welcome. It is a snowy, chilly January day, and I am going to be making homemade bread and a soup for dinner. I went to Sally's Baking Addiction and found a recipe for sandwich bread, and I printed it out, and I have all of the ingredients ready to go. So let's make a delicious homemade bread for dinner. One of my goals for 2025 is to make more things from scratch, and bread is number one on the list. And it takes time to find that recipe and perfect it. And I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a very good bread recipe, but I'm just trying to figure out, how do I want it to shape, what pan to use. But I do know that I want to use my KitchenAid mixer because I want it to do all of the work. I have tried using the bread machine in the past, and I just don't love the way that it comes out. I find it's a little bit more of a heavier, dense bread. And I have had a lot of luck with my KitchenAid mixer making pizza dough. So I am going to link the recipe down below, and I followed the instructions almost exactly. So I have everything in the bowl, and then I let it sit for the 5 minutes, and the yeast has activated. That's one of the things that you want to make sure is that your yeast has a nice froth to it, because if it doesn't, your bread is not going to rise. So I'm adding in the butter and then adding in the 1 cup of flour at a time and letting the KitchenAid mixer do all of the work. I have made bread from scratch in the past, but it was more of a novelty thing. Like I would make it on a chilly, cold day to go along with homemade soup or chili. But I really would like to make bread more consistently. We don't eat a lot of bread, but I would like to be able to add it into like kind of a routine and maybe make it once a week or, whenever it is needed. And I have tried to do the sourdough. I tried to make my own sourdough starter, but I really don't think it's for me. I'm kind of an overthinker, and I just feel like if I had a lot of children and a big family, I really do think that sourdough would work well. But I think for our family, I think it's just finding that one recipe and perfecting it would work the best for us. I set the timer for 6 minutes and let the mixer do all of the work. And I was very happy with the way that the dough came off the hook. It wasn't sticky at all. It seems like a really nice soft dough, but I'm also using bread flour, so that's definitely going to make it rise a little bit, but I did have a large bag and I wanted to use it. So I did put a little bit of flour on here and just kneaded it a few times by hand. And then I just read the instructions again, and it said to kind of poke the bread, and if it bounces back, then it's good. So I was very happy with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and then put it in the bowl. I'm just going to use cooking spray, or you could use any kind of oil, and just make sure that it's not going to stick. And then I'm going to cover it, put it into the oven, and then I'm going to use the bread proof setting that I have, and then let it sit for about an hour and a half. It's said to do it for 2 hours, but I am going to do it for 90 minutes. While the bread is rising, I'm going to start making a minestrone soup. I went to All Recipes and found one that looked really good. It had really good reviews, and I'm going to use this as a guideline. I'm not going to stick to it directly because I do not have all of the ingredients. So I am going to start chopping. I enjoy chopping vegetables, and we are going to start off with some onions, some celery, and carrots. I usually always have those vegetables, and I also have a couple of zucchini too. So we're going to get those all chopped up to try this new soup recipe.
Yesterday there was sun and there was rain, beauty in the mundane. And as the light startled our eyes, we let go of disguise.
I have my large enamel covered cast iron Dutch oven, and I have some olive oil, and then I'm putting in the garlic, and then I'm going to add in the onion and then saute it for a few minutes so I have my vegetables ready to go. I'm going to leave the zucchini because it gets a lot softer, and it called for 2 cups of chicken broth and 2 cups of water. I'm going to use the full 4 cups of chicken broth. I just have 2 cans of beans. That's what I'm going to use. The recipe said that they preferred more beans in it. I am using a can of diced tomatoes and then a can of tomato sauce, and then it also called for wine, and we got a nice bottle of red wine for Christmas, so I am going to use that in the soup. So as the onions have cooked down a little bit, I'm just going to go ahead and add in the celery and the carrots, just so it has a little bit of flavor, like from the onion and the garlic, and then the little bit of olive oil here. And then I'm just going to stir it up, and then I'm going to add in the wine here. The pot wasn't too hot. I wish it would have been a little bit hotter, so that way I would have been able to add in the wine and then cook off the alcohol. But it's okay. It still turned out really good, but it's just one of those things when you're cooking with the cast iron, you have to be a little bit careful because you don't want it too hot. But making this again, I would definitely make sure my pan was a lot hotter to cook off the alcohol and then enhance that rest of the flavor of the wine. And for seasonings, I'm just using salt, pepper, I'm using oregano, basil, and parsley.
Hand in hand, building castles out of sand, reaching for the grand. As willows align, we lose track of time. Head up high, now we climb. Oh, dreamy, breezy, we go. Easy, easy on our tiptoes. Undercover agents of the other. Beyond gravel, beyond dawn. A bigger scale, the world inhales as we go.
I have the broth and the cans of tomatoes in here, and I'm also going to add in a can of tomato paste. I find that this really enhances the flavor and it just thickens up the broth a little bit. So I wanted to have a nice flavor of a broth, not just tomato. So I'm going to let that cook for a little bit, and then I just wrote down what I used. That's one of the things I love about cooking, is that you can kind of make it your own. So I don't have, any spinach. I have some frozen peas I want to use up. So I am going to add those in. So we're going to go back to the bread. This was after the 90 minutes. I love the way that it poofed up, and I'm just going to punch it down, and then a little bit of flour. And honestly, I don't really think that I needed to kind of shape it anymore. I should have just left it out because the instructions say to put it into kind of a square rectangle shape, because you're going to roll it up to make the loaf to fit in the loaf pan. Now, I just had a very simple pan for the bread. I think it's a little bit too small because I know using bread flour, it's really going to rise and get big, but I would like to find some pans that would make more of like a sandwich size bread. So I want to perfect the recipe before I start thinking about pans. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray the pan, and then all I'm going to do is roll up the dough into kind of a loaf shape and then put it into the pan, and then I'm going to cover it back up, put it back in the oven, and then let it rise again for a second rising. I think it said an hour, but I was on a little bit of a time crunch because I should have started it earlier. So I'm only going to let it rise for 30 minutes this time. Now back to the soup. So I let it simmer for a little bit. I'm going to turn the heat down and put the lid on to let the vegetables cook a little bit more. And then when I come back, I really just want to kind of see how the broth is. Is there enough liquid? That was one of the things I read a lot about in the comments, was that there wasn't enough liquid. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the beans right now. There's a little bit of paper off the can whenever I opened it, so I was glad that I caught that. And then I'm just going to stir this in, and then also add in the zucchini. And I also want to taste the broth. I want to see if it needs any more seasoning. And I did found that it still had a little bit of a tomato taste to it. So I'm going to adjust the seasonings for what I think is right, but just keeping it very simple. And I think, moving forward, I would definitely make this soup again, but this was a very large amount. I think it's sad that it fed 8 people, but I wanted to try just a recipe to see if I could figure out, kind of the base for a nice minestrone soup. And now I was just kind of testing the carrots to see where they were, if they needed a lot more cooking or just a little bit more. So I'm going to put the lid back on and then let it cook a little bit more with the zucchini and the beans. I also added in the peas right now, and this is a really great soup to clean out any vegetables that you have or any, odds and ends cans in your pantry. I really think this would be a great soup just to use up the things that you have when you can't get to the grocery store. Here is the bread after 30 minutes. It's already raised a lot, and I know once it bakes, it's going to be even bigger. And I'm putting it into the oven at 350 degrees. I'm going to bake it for about 32 minutes, and then I'm going to check on the soup again. It is boiling away, so I'm just going to stir it up. Once again, check the liquid. If I found that I needed a little bit more, I would just add some water to this, but I'm glad that I did use the full chicken broth. So once again, I'm just going to taste the broth. Perfect. I found it had a really nice flavor. It wasn't just like tomato soup. It had like the nice seasonings and everything in there. And then once again, I'm just taking the fork and making sure that the carrots are cooked all the way through, and they were. It is time to take the bread out. Look at the size of this bread. I knew it was going to be big because I was using bread flour, and my pan was a little bit smaller than what I would like. So I'm also going to take some butter. I always use salted butter, so I didn't add any more salt to the recipe when I made it because the 4 tablespoons of butter was salted. So I'm just going to go ahead, take it out of the pan, and then I'm just going to take my stick of butter and then rub the top of it so it's nice and golden, and then it gives a little bit of that saltiness to it. But this is definitely a novelty loaf of bread because it is so big. So there it is. Like, this would never fit in the toaster. Like, to make a sandwich with it, you would need like 1 slice and then just cut it in half. But I really like the way that the recipe was. It was a nice, light, fluffy bread. It was really easy to do it with the KitchenAid mixer. So now it's time to plate everything up. So I'm going to take my soup and then put it in the bowls and then finish it off with the nice, freshly baked warm bread. The soup recipe did call for pasta, and it said to cook the pasta separately and then put it at the bottom of the bowl, which I think is a really great idea because it can get mushy. But since we were having bread, I decided to skip the pasta, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of Parmesan cheese and pepper on the top. And I really did enjoy this soup, and holy smokes, it made a great big pot. But I think it gave me a lot of ideas on how I can quickly make a pot of soup come together with just using staples that I have in my pantry and then cleaning out my refrigerator. So here is the bread. I wish I would have let it cool down a little bit more, but we were already late having dinner. So it was like it wasn't like, it was kind of mushing up a little bit. And then like my bread was all uneven, like some slices were really, really big, but I was very happy with this bread. It called for 2 tablespoons of sugar, and I think 1 tablespoon would be enough. You could probably use honey too. So anyways, I am going to get this buttered up, and then we are going to enjoy it with the soup, and it was so good. It was definitely the perfect afternoon activity to do on this day. So I have the bread in a Ziploc bag so we can enjoy it. I would like to make some grilled cheese sandwiches with it, and this soup made a lot. So this container I'm going to keep for lunches. This one here I'm going to put in the freezer, and then these single serve ones I'm going to put in the freezer too. The Ziploc, I really like this brand, and I think these will be really great on busy days when I don't have anything for lunch. So the soup was a hit. The bread was a hit, and keep watching because I have a little update to share with all of you. If you are new to my channel, you might not know, but we rescued a beagle a few years ago, and unfortunately he sometimes looks for things to eat, and he unfortunately found the loaf of bread. So I decided to go ahead and make another loaf very quickly, and I am very happy with the way that it came out. I let the machine do all of the work. I knew what was expected, and I found that this loaf turned out a lot better with the shape. I did it a little bit tighter and then let it raise a little bit longer and then let it cool before I sliced it, and it was delicious. So both recipes will be linked down below, and I look forward to sharing more on how I try and perfect my bread recipe.